On the 3rd of August 1158, Frederick of Swabia, better known as Barbarossa, Redbeard, was camping with his army along the river Adda and decided to listen to the requests of the survivors of Laus Pompeia, which had been destroyed by the army of Milan. These people asked for some land to rebuild their city on, and on that day Barbarossa marked out the boundaries of Laus Nova, that is New Lodi, on Egazzoni Hill. The history of Lodi Cathedral really starts with the building of the city, as it was one of the earliest buildings in the main square, the very heart of the city, which was to become Victoria Square in communal times.
The church, one of the largest in Lombardy, is dedicated to the Assumption, and it is the bishop's see and ecclesia mater of a very old diocese dating back to St. Bassiano's time.
Two years after the foundation of Laus Nova, the building of the cathedral had already started. Barbarossa himself donated a lot of money for its building to testify how important it was. People from Lodi are still grateful to the Swabish emperor, and Lodi is the only Italian city which still remembers Barbarossa. He can be seen on the back of Lodi's banner, and his bust is in a niche of the town hall, together with Naus Pompeius Straboni and Roman council who founded ancient Laus.
Stones from Lodi Vecchio were used to build the cathedral. This means that the two towns are historically and politically linked, but it also underlines the fact that at the time it was quite common to take material from the Roman buildings of Lodi Vecchio after it was destroyed, milestones and burial stones from cemeteries, because there was a lack of raw material to build in the southern part of Lombardy, and Romanesque was the fashionable style of the time. At the beginning, the building works were quite fast. The apse was completed in 1163, and on November the 4th, San Bassiano's body was transferred to the new crypt from Lodi Vecchio in the emperor's presence.
The building of the cathedral will go on until 1284, when the Gothic prothom was raised, supported by columns set on two lion-shaped bases. The sculptures on the main portal, which date back to the 12th century, were possibly works of art from Piacenza. The fanlight with the Redeemer between the Virgin and Saint Bassiano, the statues of Adam and Eve at both sides of the door, and the caryatids which hold up the lintel like grotesque telemons. The facade is in terracotta brick, which reveals some Renaissance addings. The large central rose window in 1506 and two gabled double lancet windows in 1509, which modified the original medieval openings. The dimmed medieval mystic light wasn't suited to the Renaissance style. Originally the facade had a lot of small openings, double lancet windows, single lancet windows, and a small rose window. Above the medieval rose window there was a niche where the statue of Saint Bassiano was placed. The original statue of 1284 is now inside the cathedral, while a copy is placed in the superior niche, which originally gave light to a round window which was closed during the works in the 16th century.
The massive bell tower attached to the facade dates back to the 16th century and substituted another one which was damaged by a fire during a battle. Callisto Piazza planned it, but it was left unfinished in 1555 without the pinnacle and the trabeation, which should have been on the top.
If we had come to the cathedral more than 50 years ago, we would have seen it very different. We would have seen the inside of a late Baroque church. The cathedral underwent many changes, above all in the interior, both in the 16th and in the 18th centuries. In the 18th century, the church was radically changed and enriched with decorations, plasters and paintings, which covered the original Romanesque walls. Demolishing it and rebuilding it was even considered, as it was in very bad condition. Between 1958 and 1964, after some radical restoration works under the leadership of architect Alessandro Degani, all those addings were removed, except for some Renaissance elements in the facade. So we can again see the ancient architecture which had been hidden for 2 centuries.
The cathedral was planned following the oldest Lombard method, that is the alternate planimetric system. It means that every great span of the main nave corresponds to 2 smaller ones in every aisle. The cross vaults are raised upon large round pillars. On each of them there were tiles with inscriptions stating which guild had paid for the building of each pillar. For example, this pillar was raised thanks to the donation of a shoemaker. But not only were pillars built thanks to a fundraising, the whole cathedral was sponsored by local rich people who gave great donations, and by guilds who ordered single elements, such as windows which respected the overall style of the building but were made to the sponsor's taste. Starting from the 14th century, on the right-hand side, some chapels were opened by the aristocracy from Lodi. The first is the chapel of St. John the Baptist. Once the baptismal font in Verona red marble was here. Now it is in Broletto Square, where it is used as a fountain. In the chapel sponsored by Oldrado da Ponte, you can see a polyptych and triptych painted by the Piazza family in the 16th century. Next to it, you can see the chapel of San Gallo, sponsored by Galluccino Codecasa, and the chapel of the Holy Cross, sponsored by the Cadamosto family. The fourth chapel was the chapel of the Madonna with the Snow, sponsored by Niccolò Sommariva. Now it is a vestibule which leads to the sacristy, to the vestments hall, to the chapter hall, to the bishop's chapel, to the canon's courtyard, and to the bishop's palace.
The Chapel of the Blessed Sacrament, now called Chapel of the Relics, was built in the 16th century behind the inferior apse on the left. It has an octagonal plan and a pavilion dome which was maintained after the last restoration works because it is a good example of the architecture in the style of the late Bramante. The presbyterial area is built on 2 levels. The lower one was built in the 60s and modified in the 80s to cope with the new rules of the church, and has an altar table made from the monolithic sarcophagus dating from the Romanesque times, and the bishop's more modern ambo and chair. On the upper level you can see the altar of the 18th century. This is the oldest part in the church and the most modified during the centuries, both in the apse, where the windows were closed and later opened, and in the lower crypt.
The crypt is very similar to the one you can see in the Cathedral of Piacenza, but unlike it, this crypt was made up of 4 naves with a row of columns in the very center, which was removed in the 16th century. A new span was created, and at the same time the floor was lowered in order to use it better. In the center there is the altar, which dates back to 1856. The relics of San Bassiano, the patron saint who died in 409, are kept here. The word crypt comes from the Greek verb kryptein, which means to hide, and wants to ensure that the relics can be worshipped and touched in a safe place. When the crypt was completed, The grave was set in the right transept where you can now see the saint's sarcophagus. In the left transept, you can see the altar with St. Albert's relics, who is the other patron saint of Lodi.
On the wall, behind the altar above the frescoes on the 14th century, there is a bas relief which represents the Last Supper. It comes from Lodi Vecchio and was made before the cathedral was built. Going downstairs, you can go to the Bishop's Burial Hall. It was created ex novo under the floor of the central nave during the restoration works last century.
The cathedral was given back to its congregation on the 25th of May 1964, a few months after the 4th of November 1963, which was the 8th anniversary of St. Bassiano's transfer and should have been the day for the unveiling of the cathedral. In 1970, Pope Paolo VI gave the cathedral the status of minor basilica.
Alessandro De Gani. I said it and then I paused.
But it also underlines the fact that at the time it was quite common to take material from ciao. Ah, qui bloopers.
The cathedral went. Demolishing it was even considered, as it was in very bad condition. Demolishing it and rebuilding it was even considered, as it was in very bad condition. No, that was a lot of strange words.
No, sorry, presbyterial.
Because it was a good example of architecture in the style of the late Bramante. I can just...